Returned depressed from an evening with Helen and half a dozen of her young political friends. Such a passion for liquidating the people who don't agree with them, and such a sincere conviction that liquidation is necessary. Revolting, but only to be expected. Regard the problem of reform exclusively as a matter of politics and economics, and you must approve and practice liquidation. Consider recent history. Industrialism has grown pari passu with population. Now, where markets are expanding, the two besetting problems of all industrial societies solve themselves. New inventions may create technological unemployment, but expanding markets cure it as it's made. Each individual may possess inadequate purchasing power, but the total number of individuals is steadily rising. Many small purchasing powers do as much as few bigger ones. Our population is now stationary, will soon decline. Shrinkage instead of expansion of markets. Therefore, no more automatic solution of economic problems. Birth control necessitates the use of coordinating political intelligence. There must be a large-scale plan. Otherwise, the machine won't work. In other words, politicians will have to be about 20 times as intelligent as heretofore. Will the supply of intelligence be equal to the demand? And of course, intelligence, as Miller's always insisting, isn't isolated. The act of intelligently planning modifies the emotions of the planners. Consider English politics. We've made plenty of reforms without ever accepting the principles underlying them. Compare the king's titles with his present position. Compare our protestations that we'll never have anything to do with socialism with the realities of state control. There are no large-scale plans in English politics, and hardly any thinking in terms of first principles. With what results? Among others, that English politics have been, on the whole, very good-natured. The reason is simple. Deal with practical problems as they arise and without reference to first principles. Politics are a matter of higgling. Now, higglers lose tempers, but don't normally regard one another as fiends in human form. But this is precisely what men of principle and systemic planners can't help doing. A principle is, by definition, right. A plan for the good of the people. Axioms from which it logically follows that those who disagree with you and won't help to realize your plan are enemies of goodness and humanity. No longer men and women, but personifications of evil, fiends incarnate. Killing men and women is wrong, but killing fiends is a duty. Hence the Holy Office, hence Robespierre and the Ogpur. Men with strong religious and revolutionary faith, men with well thought out plans for improving the lot of their fellows, whether in this world or the next, have been more systematically and cold-bloodedly cruel than any others. Thinking in terms of first principles entails acting with machine guns. A government with a comprehensive plan for the betterment of society is a government that uses torture. Per contra, if you never consider principles and have no plan, but deal with situations as they arise, piecemeal, you can afford to have unarmed policemen, liberty of speech, and habeas corpus. Admirable. But what happens when an industrial society learns A, how to make technological advances at a constantly accelerating speed, and B, to prevent conception? Answer: it must either plan itself in accordance with general political and economic principles, or else break down. But governments with principles and plans have generally been tyrannies making use of police spies and terrorism. Must we resign ourselves to slavery and torture for the sake of coordination? Breakdown, on the other hand, Inquisition and Ogpur rule on the other. A real dilemma if the plan is mainly economic and political. But think in terms of individual men, women, and children, not states, religions, economic systems, and such like abstractions. There is then a hope of passing between the horns. For if you begin by considering concrete people, you see at once that freedom from coercion is a necessary condition of their developing into full-grown human beings, that the form of economic prosperity, which consists in possessing unnecessary objects, doesn't make for individual well-being, that a leisure filled with passive amusements is not a blessing, that the conveniences of urban life are bought at a high physiological and mental price, that an education which allows you to use yourself wrongly is almost valueless, that a social organization resulting in individuals being forced every few years to go out and murder one another must be wrong, and so on. Whereas if you start from the state, the faith, the economic system, there is a complete transvaluation of values. Individuals must murder one another because the interests of the nation demand it, must be educated to think of ends and disregard means because the schoolmasters are there and don't know of any other method, must live in towns, must have leisure to read the newspapers and go to the movies, must be encouraged to buy things they don't need because the industrial system exists and has to be kept going, must be coerced and enslaved because otherwise they might think for themselves and give trouble to their rulers. The Sabbath was made for man, but man now behaves like the Pharisees and insists that he is made for all things. Science, industry, nation, money, religion, schools, which were really made for him. Why? Because he is so little aware of his own interests as a human being that he feels irresistibly tempted to sacrifice himself to these idols. There is no remedy except to become aware of one's interests as a human being, and having become aware, to learn to act on that awareness, which means learning to use the self and learning to direct the mind. It's almost wearisome the way one always comes back to the same point. Wouldn't it be nice for a change if there were another way out of our difficulties, a shortcut? A method requiring no greater personal effort than recording a vote or ordering some enemy of society to be shot. A salvation from outside, like a dose of calomel.